Good afternoon. A year ago, I had the opportunity to sit down with an individual who claimed to have been sexually abused as a young child by the late Bishop Christopher J. Weldon. His sad recollection of abuse was both heart-wrenching and deeply troubling. It also conflicted with what I had been told about this victim and the claims that he had made going back to 2014. The very emotional recounting that I heard from that victim and what I was told previously simply didn't square. So, in fairness to this individual, I needed to have the case reopened and independently reviewed. I first reached out to church officials to see if this matter fell under the May 2019 papal directive, Vos Estis Lux Mundi, you are the light of the world, a new independent third-party reporting system to receive allegations of sexual misconduct by bishops. I was told that because Bishop Weldon was deceased, it was not within the purview of this new system to take on this matter. Fortunately, Jeffrey Trent had just recently begun his new duties with the diocese as the director of the Office of Safe Environments and Victim Assistance. At his suggestion, we sought a truly independent investigator to relook at this allegation in July 2019, and we contacted retired Judge Peter Velis to conduct an independent and comprehensive investigation into this complaint, to determine the credibility of this allegation, as well as how the diocese handled this matter and opportunities for improvement. Today, I invite Judge Velis to share with us his finding.
Thank you, Bishop. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your attendance here today. It's not the most savory of occasions, as far as I'm concerned, but in the interest of justice, I have to come before you today to report to you basically what the bishop has articulated. And before I do, let me give you a brief history of what transpired prior to his commissioning me to go about this task. Attorney Jack Egan of the diocese, along with Director Trant, obviously carrying whatever request was to be sent by the bishop, reached me and went over some parameters regarding an investigation into allegations about deceased Bishop Weldon respecting a certain individual. They appeared very earnest about the fact that they wanted this matter resolved, in the sense that they needed a full, in-depth inquiry, and at some point, after giving me all of the various particulars of what they expected, I certainly asked them if there were any particular objectives, and they said if I were willing to accept this task, that the bishop would outline them for me. So I decided to accept the task. My next order of business was to present myself upon request to the office of the bishop. To summarize my meeting with him, it was my intent to inquire of him exactly what he expected of me. And frankly speaking, ladies and gentlemen, I was startled, not surprised, but certainly experienced something in terms of being in the presence of a holy person that, as I say, startled me. His answer to my question, Bishop, what do you expect of me? As he's looking straight in my eyes, I can see him now, and actually hitting the table, he said, I want the truth. I looked at him as I always did in these kinds of situations that I never had before in my life, but where an individual who would be confronting me. And I said, the truth. He said, that's right. I want the truth. I demand the truth. So an answer to a request was not met with an explanation. It was met with a demand. Thus, I can tell you with every degree of certainty, lest there be any concern whatsoever, I would not be in front of you here today. That investigation, if it were to take place, clearly wouldn't have been through me, or, I think, any individual, but for Bishop Rosansky being troubled and plagued with the thoughts that this matter had not been resolved. Notwithstanding all that he had heard about it, it wasn't enough for this man. And he made it abundantly clear, once again, that he demanded the truth. But I can tell you, without question, indubitably, this investigation would not have taken place but for his insistence, according to the dictate, and I stress the word dictate, that he gave me. Seated next to him was Director Trant, who, in looking at him and inferring at least the same request and inquiry about whether or not or what he expected of me, he looked at me and said, "A right and rigorous investigation." So frankly, folks, I departed the premises, not intimidated by any stretch of the imagination, but I had a clear call to duty. So I went about my business, assisted by retired Springfield Police Detective Dennis O'Connor, seated at my right, without whom this would have been a much more arduous task. It was not a savory expedition by any stretch of the imagination. The subject matter plagued me throughout for one paramount reason, and that is, this was one of the few times in my life when I ever had to pass judgment on something, and more importantly, someone who would not be here to defend him or herself. So the stream of consciousness throughout this investigation had that in mind. Every one of us in this room cherishes the right to be able to confront an accuser. Every one of us in this room has to have with them an assurance that they always have that in everyday life. Because there's nothing worse than an accusation that is either false or that you can't defend. So this investigation was conducted in the light most favorable to the bishop. And the specifics of my report set that forward, that premise. Once again, and I repeat it with emphasis, with stern emphasis, it plagued me throughout the course of this investigation that that man did not have the opportunity to deny any accusations. Notwithstanding that, and based on my knowledge, training, experience, and whatever integrity I certainly would have to employ, taught to me by my parents, taught to me by my life experiences, I went about my business not influenced by emotion, but on a fact-finding mission. And that mission was to seek out, find, and determine the truth. That was demanded of me by this man at my left. And as Director Trant said, and I assure you, it was done according to his dictate, it was right and it was rigorous. You all either have or will have a copy of that full report. In that report, you will see at its introduction that my charge was threefold. The first was to determine the veracity of the allegations, the credibility of allegations with respect to Bishop Weldon. The second was to determine and assess the way the diocese handled the matter. And the last, not to trivialize the first two, but clearly the most important, is suggestions to the diocese for opportunities, practices, and procedures that ought to be followed in the future to treat an alleged victim with not only the efficiency and the competence of an assessment of allegations being addressed, but also with compassion and, most important, accountability and transparency. So that was a threefold endeavor, and it took place with a focus on, at all times, the importance of all three. I must say, so that I can put any other fears or questions to rest, that this diocese was way above what any investigator would expect in terms of furnishing, upon request, any and all information pertinent to our inquiry. Mr. DuPont was very straightforward in giving me any and all information, myself and Detective O'Connor, that we requested. Director Trant made sure that that happened, and those two, combined with others, working within the hierarchy of the diocese, were more than cooperative. I want to make that abundantly clear. What I hope I've made abundantly clear was that this was a most unsavory endeavor in so many respects. As information unfolded, as the investigatory process unfolded, there was a two-prong prism through which all of this was observed, examined, and analyzed. One, and most important, the veracity of the allegations, and two, how was this complaint handled? The report sets out, so that I'm not wasting your time, specifics in that regard. And the report, most importantly, not to trivialize the first two, because it's obvious. My services were commissioned after, at that point, the alleged deed had already been accomplished in terms of allegations, and even God can't change the past. So clearly, those three objectives were the most, in my mind, commendable in terms of heading off future ills that may exist with the same subject matter that has plagued the Roman Catholic Church now for a considerable amount of years. Its atmosphere is pervaded with doubt. Its own parishioners have lost faith in their faith, and yet still have kept their faith in their faith. But I must tell you, I make that statement not as a member of the Roman Catholic Church, but as a Greek Orthodox. And I only tell you that because I want you to be rest assured that I looked at this totally through the prism of independent lens. Paradoxically, from this investigation and anecdotal pieces that were attendant thereto, but not part of my charge, I learned a lot about the Roman Catholic Church and came to have the highest respect for it. And I want every parishioner to know I respect the Roman Catholic Church as much as any other religion that I have any knowledge about on this earth. Now, that may seem strange to you in view of the subject matter that I came here to address. I'm not here to give you a speech. I'm here as an investigator to report my results. I believe you all have, and if not, frankly, raise your hand, an executive summary of the results of this investigation. In short, after an in-depth fact-finding mission, being plagued with what I told you, conducting this investigation, as Detective O'Connor and I consistently said, and as Detective O'Connor initially said, we, Judge, are the voice of the bishop. Because as you say, Judge, he has to have the benefit of a doubt because of the benefit of due process not being here for him. I can't stress enough how much that troubled me. I had to be fair. That's what this man demanded. Not asked, demanded. Coupled with, bring me back the truth, Judge. So, investigation took us to many spaces, places, thoughts. The investigatory procedure was right and rigorous. I don't say that vaunting. I say that because it's fact. The voice of Bishop Weldon was through us. I employed a standard of proof that I had to use in assessing the credibility of those allegations. That was for the greatest benefit of Bishop Weldon. And that standard of proof was beyond a reasonable doubt. I contemplated other standards of proof to see whether or not that was in fairness to not only the bishop, but also to his accuser. And still, after profound thought about what would be the most fair thing to do, and doing a balancing test, the non-presence of the bishop to deny any of these accusations outbalanced the other side of the equation, which is to use a lesser standard of proof than beyond a reasonable doubt. So that all of you know and it's clear, the standard of proof that I use is the highest standard, beyond a reasonable doubt. After close to 1 year of an investigatory process, leaving no stones that we were aware of unturned, assessing, reassessing, examining, and re-examining all statements for purposes of consistency, inconsistency, and the various variables that are employed in assessing credibility in this kind of endeavor. I came to the conclusion and stand behind it as strongly as I did when I first made it to this moment, and that is that these accusations were unequivocally credible. There are those who will feel a great deal of pain in hearing that. Pain that I'm sure I will never know, but for what I uncovered, this victim has undergone and is continuing to undergo. Pain that I undergo still with my thoughts about the whole concept of due process. But so you know how firm I am in asserting to you that the finding I made, I stand behind as an indisputable truth. Those were credible, unequivocally credible allegations. You were told by Mr. DuPont that Bishop Weldon would like to readdress you. Subsequent to that, and before I sit down, you're going to hear from Director Trant, and you're going to hear from my colleague at the bench, both of us now retired, thinking we were going into the enjoyment of the rest of our lives. Is my good friend, Judge Daniel Ford, who will be taking over at some point and addressing the real monumental task that will be and has been recognized to be achieved, and that will be to set forth what I'm sure all of you are all familiar with, based on at least what I've read in the newspapers and my knowledge of what Director Trant has told me. This is a task force that's been established. The bishop ordered it. The bishop made sure that it was accomplished, and the bishop has made sure, according to my satisfaction, that they will all be briefed. That first briefing, and by briefed, I'm sorry, briefed by myself and Detective O'Connor, with respect to the ways we think these kinds of things should be handled in the future. They don't have to accept, and Judge Ford, along with his committee, will assess each and every one of those suggestions that are particularized in this report. I can't emphasize enough how I hope they follow what I will like to call dictates, but I don't have that authority. So their suggestions, I really hope they're complied with. It's called a system of checks and balances that has been sorely needed within the hierarchy of the Catholic Church in assessing the investigatory process, which is the real nucleus of this entire problem. I can honestly tell you that that's the best they can do for the future, because deeds have already been accomplished. The misdeeds, evil deeds, have already been accomplished. So that all that can be done to satisfy those of the good faith of the Catholic Church, to not only restore their faith in those who serve God and who they're exposed to every Sunday at Mass, not only restore it, but give them a sense of satisfaction that the Catholic Church, this diocese, will address any and all evils and anything of that nature in the future in an efficient, competent manner. So, you're going to hear from my former colleague, you're going to hear from Director Trant, and at this time, I guess the protocol is I turn it over to the bishop. Thank you. Excuse me, Bishop.
Oh, wait a minute, that's mine. This is yours.
Wrong Mass. First thing that's...
Judge Velis, thanks to you and to your chief investigator, retired Sergeant Dennis O'Connor, for undertaking this difficult task. I accept your finding of credibility with regards to the allegations of sexual abuse against the late Christopher J. Weldon, former Bishop of Springfield. And as such, I direct the following: that Trinity Health remove the former bishop's name from its rehab facilities, that the diocesan cemeteries make necessary plans to move the former bishop's remains to a less prominent location marked with a simple gravestone, to immediately remove all honorable mentions, references, memorials, and pictures of the former bishop from all Catholic facilities, that his name be placed on our diocesan website listing all those with credible allegations of sexual abuse of a child or vulnerable adult. In addition, I have notified the Archdiocese of New York, the former bishop's home diocese, of this finding. I have also alerted Cardinal O'Malley and the United States Catholic Conference of Bishops, and will provide a complete report to the nuncio in Washington, D.C., as well as to the regional district attorney's offices. Most importantly, I want to sincerely apologize to this victim, not just for the terrible abuse that he had to endure as a young child, abuse which still haunts him to this very day, but I want to apologize for the chronic mishandling of this case time and time again since 2014. In almost every instance, we have failed this courageous man, who nonetheless persevered, thanks in part to a reliable support network, as well as to a deep desire for a just response for the terrible abuse which he endured. This finding, though clearly justified, will be painful for many Catholics, including myself, to hear, as yet again their church has failed to live up to its promise and obligations. That is why we need to go beyond an apology. Rather, once and for all, we need to implement real and substantial changes, some which we have already undertaken with our complete revamping of our Office of Safe Environment and Victim Assistance, some which are recommended in the second part of Judge Velis' report, and still others which will arise from the work of our recently created independent task force on the response to the sexual abuse in the Diocese of Springfield, a group whose work begins in earnest today. We owe this effort to this victim and to all victims and family members and to the whole of our faith and civic communities. I'm honored to welcome again our task force chair, retired Judge Daniel Ford. Judge Ford.
Bishop, thank you very much. Good afternoon to all of you. I have known Peter Velis for quite a long time. We served together on the Superior Court for approximately 15 years. And I know that he had a well-deserved reputation, not only for being scrupulously fair, but also for being exceedingly thorough. I've had the occasion to read and reread his report, and I can only say that when it comes to thoroughness, he has outdone himself. I would describe his work as not just thorough and comprehensive, but exhaustive. He has done a great service to the Springfield Diocese, and so I would like to add my voice to the voices of others who have said, thank you, Judge Velis, for a job well done. The diocese is very much in your debt. As I see it, in many ways, this is a sad day for the diocese. The sins, the crimes, the shortcomings of the past have been revealed, and those who have failed to live up to their obligations or to carry out their responsibilities properly have been named, exposed, and shamed. What happened here in the past was nothing short of disgraceful. Disgraceful. But in many other ways, I suggest this may be a happy day, because the scab has been ripped off the wound and the truth has been laid bare for all the world to see. And I think that's a good thing. Against this unfortunate backdrop, the healing and restoration of faith in the Springfield Diocese can begin. Judge Velis's report looks primarily to the past. The task force, which I am honored to chair, will look exclusively to the future. Judge Velis has made some very thoughtful recommendations about ways to improve the process going forward. He has given us the foundation upon which to build, and we intend to gather additional data and to receive input from all stakeholders, including clergy and survivors of clergy abuse, and to consider adopting Judge Velis's suggestions, amending or modifying them, or proposing additional suggestions on our own. I met with Bishop Rosansky last week in his office, and I just want to say I want to associate myself with the remarks that Judge Velis made about Bishop Rosansky. He is a terrific person, in my view. And he told me in no uncertain terms that he wants the work of our task force to continue, even though he is leaving for the Archdiocese of St. Louis in the very near future. He emphasized to me the vital importance of our work and stressed that what he wants from us is a document that identifies what we think are the best practices to deal with the scourge of child sexual abuse in the future, so as to enable him and his successor or successors to achieve justice in any particular case and to provide a safe environment for the faithful, and in particular for the children of the faithful. Bishop Rosansky has already moved in that direction by making a number of positive and important steps without being prompted or pressured to do so by our task force or anybody else. Perhaps the most important step that he has taken was hiring Jeff Trant to be the Director of Safe Environment and Victim Assistance last year. Over the last several months, I've come to know Jeff very well, and I have seen that he is deeply and passionately committed to these high ideals. In my opinion, he is a very sincere and bright young man of clear vision, unimpeachable character, tremendous competence, impeccable judgment, and a remarkable work ethic. In short, he is a home run for the Springfield Diocese. If there are any survivors of clergy abuse out there who have not chosen to come forward, I urge them to consider doing so. I can assure them that they will be welcomed, that they will be treated with respect, and that their complaint will be investigated fairly and professionally under Jeff Trant's supervision. I feel certain that they will realize that things have changed, and hopefully, with the input from our task force, will continue to change for the better. I would like to think that a new day has dawned here in the Diocese of Springfield, and I commit myself to doing everything that I can do to help the bishop and his successors to make that day a bright one for the people of this diocese and to restore confidence in those people who were charged with the responsibility of administering the affairs of the diocese. It is a challenging assignment that our task force has been given, but I am very confident that the talented and diverse group of people that comprise the task force will be up to that challenge. Thank you very much. I think, Bishop, you want to invite questions? All right.
Judge Ford, again, my thanks to you and the members of the independent task force who will really help us move forward into the future. And I greatly anticipate your recommendations. We will now take questions. If there are any questions?
Bishop,
Yes.
what was the reaction of the victim to Judge Velis's conclusion? Has he been told it at this point?
Yes, he has been informed. And I believe that was he informed through his lawyer?
Correct.
Yes, he was informed through his lawyer.
Judge Velis, if you could comment on, you mentioned the three things you were looking at, the allegation against the late bishop and and how those allegations were handled. Can you discuss a little bit about what your report found, what your investigation found about how those allegations were initially dealt with by the diocese?
Yes, suffice it to say, I was disappointed, but realizing at all times that they probably were plagued with the fact that it's an intimidating thing. And in view of the fact that there was so much being made about this throughout the world, I have to say that when I looked at it, I was disappointed because I felt that the whole process that was employed in assessing and eventually concluding with respect to these allegations was woefully deficient. And it was alarming to me from the standpoint of listening to the bishop's dictate and what Mr. Trant said when he said right and rigorous, and it triggered many thoughts and was the foundation for myself and Detective O'Connor setting forth suggestions for how this should be handled in the future. More particularly, the investigatory process itself was weak, deficient, and albeit done in as good faith as I believe possible at the time, it was my persuasion that albeit the review board, and the report will be more specific so that you'll fully understand what I'm saying, albeit the review board were hearing in essence allegations against three people, but of paramount importance to them, and knowing that this was a bishop, that clearly was on their minds. I drew the conclusion that they were reticent in terms of a very careful consideration of all of the allegations that were made with respect to Bishop Weldon. However, the report will indicate that they were hamstrung to a great, if not full extent, by the fact that all of the information that they should have been provided to assess and use in making their final determination was not given to them before they made that determination. When they became cognizant of it afterwards, sir, they had a seismic change in their determination to the point where, to say the least, they were shocked. That being more specifically set forth in this report. As far as the future is concerned, because your question is not only an appropriate question, but it's a question that I am glad you asked, because the investigatory process is really the key to being able to forefend any criticisms of the Catholic Church when it comes to the usual refrain of the critics who feel that the church has turned their back on these victims to protect clergy. That usual refrain being, here we go again, delay, denial, and cover-up. Consequently, the investigatory process, the nucleus, to quote Director Trant, the nucleus of this, he fully understood, knew beforehand, called us to duty, and I now understand why he said right and rigorous, because he was given the factual data that showed that that investigatory procedure on this particular case, I'm sorry to tell you, sir, was woefully deficient. Any other questions?
You've always understood there were records that were hidden or destroyed. Did you find that in the investigation?
I did not find that there were any hidden records or destroyed, except for the fact that you will see specifically mentioned in my report that at one point, upon inquiry and partially through voluntariness, I was informed by a member of the clergy that was interviewed that certain records, to the best of my recollection, calendar records, which we were looking for, itineraries regarding Bishop Weldon, back in those days, if they existed, were potentially destroyed. However, that doesn't mean they were. My impression of the response to the interviewee was that they probably were. There were other records that we were unable to access because they were in the archives, not saying they were relevant to our pursuit, but they were in the archives, kept in, frankly, a place that might have been somewhat, with all due respect, Bishop, so I don't want to frighten anyone, may have been a health hazard, described to me as, oh my God, Judge, you don't want us to really crawl down there and go into that dungeon. But clearly, in my mind, I do the impression, ma'am, that those were records that were not going to assist us in this investigation. On the other hand, it would have been more helpful, but not needed, for us to further pursue the fact that the potential, that there were still existing records with respect to Bishop Weldon's calendar, his itinerary, at or about or in the decade of the 60s. Because subsequent inquiry through other interviewees provided sufficient information to come to the conclusion that I did beyond a reasonable doubt. Had that not been the case, and there was such a necessity, then that climbing into physically the so-called dungeon, and that is, I don't say that in a pejorative sense, it was described to me by that way, that would have taken place because I committed to the bishop. I could see his eyes saying, I demand you find the trousseau. Would have compelled a further mission, so to speak. So a long answer to your question, but I have the impression that some of those records may very well have been destroyed. Anything else?
Did your investigation uncover allegations of other clergy members, other sexual abuse allegations against them?
Well, the particular individual in this case made allegations against two other members of the clergy, both deceased. However, so you don't misunderstand, I'm not saying you would, we clearly had a narrow scope of investigating the Weldon allegations. So regarding anyone else, any other members of the clergy who in any way, by inference or directly, could have been involved in the Weldon matter with respect to this particular accuser, then we looked into that, but only for the purpose of ascertaining as much information we could relevant to the Weldon allegation.
Will this spark other investigations?
I'm sorry?
Will this investigation spark other investigations of other people's names to be more present or?
Yeah, that's something that I can't answer. Any other questions? Feel free.
Jeff, you want to speak to that last question.
So this fall, previously, the Office of Safe Environment and Victim Assistance had employed a singular investigator for approximately 15 years. And that investigator had handled previous allegations that had been brought to the diocese. I've gone on record previously, I've come before you in the past to speak about imminent and immediate changes that were needed to help redress some of the chronic issues that existed within the Office of Safe Environment and Victim Assistance. Earlier this year, we announced the appointment of a panel of new investigators who are bringing a best practice approach to investigating and using forensic practice to investigate allegations. So presently, there are a number of allegations that had previously been reported to the diocese in those investigations, and I also want to be clear that we first report those allegations to the district attorneys where the abuse is reported to have happened. Under the terms of the Memorandum of Understanding that was entered into by Bishop Rosansky with District Attorney Gallouni, with District Attorney Sullivan, and with District Attorney Harrington, once we report those allegations, the diocese suspends any of its own internal review to allow prosecutors to conduct their cursory investigation. Once that has been done, we move forward with our process, and that is underway presently. To answer the underlying question, will Judge Velis's investigation spur other investigations? We will be taking a look and reviewing past cases to ensure that they were treated appropriately, and that to the fullest extent of my office's availability, we will review and we will reinvestigate where necessary. So that certainly is my commitment, that the Office of Safe Environment and Victim Assistance is here to support healing and recovery for individuals who are courageous enough to come forward and being able to arrive at the truth and to help bring closure and healing to that process. As Judge Velis mentioned, certainly the investigatory process is the nucleus, but that is not our primary end. So we certainly will be looking at cases and how they were handled in the past and employing the new tools and the resources that Bishop Rosansky has made available to the office.
Any other questions? Thank you, everyone, for coming.
Thank you. Bishop,
Let's get the church.
I'll see you before you go. Thank you. Sorry, Mark.